Coming up on the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast.
I think the one thing that has stayed true that is always good for your gut is going to be one, diversity in your diet, and two is that fiber. Not too much and not too little. So the perfect amount that is recommended right now is around 14 grams per 1,000 calories a day. People are removing those fibers because remember, fibers are non-digestible. Not everyone can digest broccoli and cauliflower like they can beans. There's so many different fibers out there from flaxseed flour, from chia seeds. There's so many. Find what works for you. And I would say like that's kind of more healthy than just eliminating all of it.
This week, I interviewed Dasha Agoulnik. She's a board certified registered dietitian, 5 times published nutrition researcher, and a competitive bodybuilder. We discussed what we learned from the paleo diet, along with the importance of fiber, healing your gut, problems with undereating, Dasha's 4-3-2-1 rule, and her one tip to get your body back to what it once was. Really enjoyed my interview with Dasha. I know you will too. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the show. All right, welcome to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. My name is Brian Gryn, and I have Dasha Agoulnik on. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And you are a coach, also have a coaching business, educational courses, do one-on-one, and I know you have a protein powder as well. But I'm glad to have you on, and we can discuss all things gut health related and much more. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks again for having me. Yeah, I'm a registered dietitian, 5 times nutrition research published author. I've competed twice in bodybuilding. So my niche and forte is my thesis was on the paleo diet and uncovering the modern and historic discrepancies in it. I
Hmm.
really focused a lot of my research in the physiological, like morphological changes that we had as human beings over the years, and how our diet and nutrients and all those combine. So I did a lot of research there, a lot of research on the paleo diet in general, and uncovering those fallacies that are in there. And my master's was in nutritional epidemiology, so studying how diet affects disease in large populations. And so a lot of my like background would be in nutrition research, I would say, and my kind of goal in all of this was to identify really what is the most optimal diet and exercise that we could apply to anyone in the population to help improve their health. My parents were cancer researchers growing up, and so I was like, how do I one up that? Like y'all are cancer researchers. So I figured this might be my next closest bet.
Yeah, and I'm curious to what was your thesis from your research done on the paleo diet, and because nowadays everyone keeps talking about eating ancestrally,
Mhm.
and I I think obviously I don't know, I think that sometimes it could be overdone maybe, because eating optimally I like to think of as like rather than eating ancestrally. But what are your thoughts around that, and what you're learning from your
From
thesis?
what I found, yeah.
Yeah.
It's based off of basically data that we got from anthropologists and cartographers. So basically, these people, these researchers went to go map out these indigenous species or indigenous populations, you can say communities, and just kind of take note of what they're doing, where they are. And what they did was they put marks on the different populations and communities. So they would be like, fish, 3. They like, foraged, 1. And then basically what they did with the paleo diet is they extrapolated that data somehow, right? I don't know, blows my mind.
Yeah.
And like a few papers will even say from Easton and some of the founders of the paleo diet, they're saying like, these people are eating like 130 grams of fiber a day or 100 plus grams of fiber a day. And you're like, how? Like,
Yeah.
their guts would be completely wrecked. Like, how is someone eating that? And then you'll go to another population, where they're eating just like seals all day. That's all they're eating is seal. And you're like, okay, well, this is vastly different than the other population. So how did we get in the mindset that, everyone's coming from this Hasda diet And they're also now not eating fiber, because I think the trend now in the paleo community is like, don't eat fiber. I guess that's now carnivore, but
Sure.
regardless, there's just so much. It was all rooted and founded on incorrect data collection. I mean, these people weren't even nutritionists. They had no like diet experience. It was literally just cartographers and anthropologists studying the communication in the population and marking down, on a scale of 1 to 5, I think, or 1 to 10, they had specific numbers of the frequency of their activity level of doing something like fishing, foraging, whatever else. And then they created data around that of what their diet would look like.
So what have you come to conclude from that, and how do you apply it for yourself and for your clients?
Yeah, so the
Yeah.
reason why I actually studied that was partially because I was consulting at that time for this researcher who was writing a book on the morphological changes that had happened. And so I was already kind of doing both at once, but I had actually this was before IBS, before low FODMAP, like FODMAP was just becoming out in the research. And I came to my professor, Tufts University, I was like, I want to do it on FODMAPs. And they're like, well, like that's like there's no research on it yet. Like, don't do it, Dasha. You won't find out much on the gut. I was like, wow, okay, well, fine. Like I'll do it on this. Now it's like FODMAPs is like 101, first thing, first line. Every single gastroenterologist is recommending low FODMAP diet,
Yeah.
which is funny now in perspective, but it kind of shows that I was always interested in that gut health and understanding what that healthiest diet would look like. And so, what was the original question? Where are we going with this?
What have you concluded from this research, and what are you applying with your clients, with yourself, like as far as what's the optimal way to eat? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I know this is going somewhere.
Yeah.
So, what I found with both of those things was the fiber. Fiber is what matters most. Whether it's right, the paleo diet that was saying, 113, 30, whatever it was, grams of fiber, or nowadays when we're seeing how fiber is a prebiotic and how important prebiotics are for probiotics, for symbiotics, for healthy gut health, and how that modulates our neurotransmitter levels and our immune health and, the gut brain axis and all of the things. I think the one thing that has stayed true that is always good for your gut is going to be one, diversity in your diet, and two is that fiber. Not too much and not too little. So the perfect amount that is recommended right now is around 14 grams per 1,000 calories a day. And what I've seen happen right now that's trending in the media is that people are removing those fibers, because remember, fibers are non-digestible. That's what allows the bacteria to ferment on them and feed on them and create those good postbiotics afterwards. Um, and people are removing those fibers because it's easier to digest. And if it's easier to digest, then I don't feel as bloated or like
Sure.
have
I
a
mean, you see that with like the carnivore
right. And then
crowd.
they introduce those fruits and vegetables back into the diet and they're like, "Oh, I'm bloating again. I That's the problem." When in reality, it's like, what if a healthy gut should be able to tolerate 14 grams per 1,000 calories per day, and there was some sort of dysbiosis or immune problem or slow digestion or something that was causing you to not be able to
To it.
tolerate types of fibers, or maybe you just didn't find the right fiber for you. Not everyone can digest broccoli and cauliflower like they can beans. There's so many different fibers out there, from flaxseed flour, from chia seeds. There's so many. Find what works for you. And I would say like that's kind of more healthy than just eliminating all of it.
Yeah. So you're saying, like, because you're seeing this, like, instead of eliminating what could be causing the problem, well, it could be causing the problem,
Could
but
be causing the
the
symptom
symptom, yeah,
not
not
yeah, and
addressing,
not addressing the problem.
right. And you're
Yeah.
saying the problem could be, yeah, obviously,
Dysbiosis, stress, lack of enzymes, all of these things that, yeah, we're burdened with a lot of stress in our day-to-day lives that decreases our ability to digest food properly. When we are in a state of sympathetic stress or arousal, our blood flow diverts away from our guts. So if you're in a constant, even subconscious state of SOS and like you're even like focused in on work and you're trying to eat food like that, your body's not in a rest and digest state. It's not going to digest food optimally, and it's not going to secrete enzymes optimally, which leads to then bloating, gas, indigestion, right? And so we're not addressing the root problem, which is what is causing you to not be able to digest these foods. And instead, we're just eliminating the symptom, kind of like a Band-Aid solution.
Yeah. You're seeing a lot of people get advice as far as eliminating, dairy and grains and things like that. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm truly a believer of everything in moderation and that our bodies should be able to tolerate, like, really the healthiest human, genetically speaking, even can tolerate the most variety of things. It's the most resilient to the most things. When we think about problems like dairy, I really truly believe it's because we are not educated enough on the components of dairy. And I do believe that some people do have problems with digesting dairy, but it is not all dairy because there are three different components to dairy. There is, I would even argue a fourth component when we talk about, but let's stick to the three, which is our macronutrients, right? Fats, carbs, and proteins. That's what all food is made of, and dairy has all of it, obviously. So the first component is fats. When we have high fat dairy, the fat molecules alongside the calcium that's found naturally in dairy form what's called a soap, an indigestible soap. And that can trigger a lot of diarrhea for people. So if you've ever had ice cream or creams or butters, things like that, and you get really digestive effects from it, maybe some of those soaps are coming. And this is also part of the reason why that high fat, low fat dairy has always been such a problem from an epidemiological perspective when we're analyzing the data. It's because we don't really know, like, are people actually digesting the fat or are they just getting it out? And that's why we see such health benefits from it. So that's a different discussion, but fats is one thing that can cause the digestive issues. Then we talk about carbohydrates, right? With carbohydrates, there's lactose. Some people do genetically have a lactose intolerance. However, in times of stress, when you have dysbiosis, when you have gut issues, your ability to digest lactose also decreases. Lastly, there's the protein component. So casein can be a trouble for people. You've seen probably the A2 milks that are now on the market because now with proteins, you're thinking more of an immune response. Fats and carbs don't give an immune response. Usually an immune response is from the proteins of any foods that we're eating. So you can have more of an immune response to the dairy. So the problem is when someone comes in and they're like, oh, I can't have butter or I can't have ice cream, so I can't have any dairy. When that's not necessarily true. Something like kefir, which is very low lactose, can be low fat, filled with probiotics, can actually, and is shown in the research to be very beneficial for your gut because it helps to break down the foods that you're eating. Now, especially if we live in a state now where, as I said, we're constantly stressed, we're not digesting food properly. If you can get that added bonus from the probiotics that are coming in and helping you to degrade the food that you're eating, makes sense.
Got it. Yeah. And what about gluten?
Gluten is very similar, and I will say that a lot of the population has an immune response, like I said, to the protein in wheat, which is gluten. And a lot of people find relief when they do go to Europe, again, because of the protein to the specific glutens that we are eating and consuming in the United States. Now, I do believe that in a healthy world, there are ways that, not everyone needs an immune response, has an immune response to it, only parts of the population. But we're having an immune problem in the United States because of our lifestyle. And so I really like what I preach at Core Perform is the 5 speed pillars, which is the 5 ways that your body is experiencing stress on a day-to-day basis And I always root back to that because if you can perfect those 5 things in your lifestyle, you'll you won't have as many immune reactions. Your gut will improve, your hormones will improve. All of these things will improve using tools that you have full control over instead of, eliminations, restrictions, all of the things.
And we talked a little bit before we got on here. So, something that we both have done for ourselves and with clients is that GI map. Is
Mhm.
this something that you use as like a common test for your clients?
Yeah, so we usually use the GI map as our preferred stool test. I will say that we see symptom improvement 90% faster and 70%, 75% cheaper than a functional doctor would. And then we've also seen that usually around 80%, 85% of our clients don't need a GI map in general. Because a lot of times these functional providers and even doctors, they work the same. Here's a bunch of tests, here's a bunch of pills to treat the tests. And no one, other than Core Perform that I know of, and a lot of maybe other coaches who are doing something similar, is addressing the root problem, which is what got you there in the first place? What is the lifestyle habit that got you there? How do you prevent it from happening? Because everyone can put you on a restrictive diet. That's easy. But how do I go from carnivore and not being able to tolerate food to liberalizing and having a healthy gut and resilient gut again? And that is what we teach and what we do with our clients and patients.
And so, what are the main things that so like, for example, with my GI map, you talk about immune response. I was a bit high in that, anti-gliadin IgA and eosinophils, which, could be IBS, who knows? I but
Usually more of a allergic reaction I see with the eosinophils. So those are
yeah.
more like mast cells. It could be from histamine related bacteria species. If I looked at it, I could kind of tell you and talk to you a little bit more. But in terms of the gluten and the anti-gliadin response, this is also true and why I've been so successful in reintroducing gluten and dairy and back into the lives of my patients. I've had patients call me years later and be like, Dasha, I'm just eating cheese and crackers, looking out my window, being like, wow, I can't believe I'm here. Like, I can't believe I made it to the point where food is normal again and I feel normal and I'm not so scared of all these things because they healed their gut. And the going back to the gliadin is there's 2 things that will cause intestinal permeability, which is the widening of your intestinal walls that basically allows quote unquote leaky gut to occur where you eat your broccoli, it passes through your bloodstream. Now you got broccoli in your brain and your brain's freaking out. That's not how it really works, but you can think of it kind of like that.
Mm.
Those proteins are being triggered and an immune response is happening to the broccoli. And so when people swap out their diet or completely resolve their diet, they're seeing not as many flares. They're not reacting to the foods anymore. So 2 things will increase that intestinal permeability. One is 2 main things, I would say. Obviously, alcohol, right? But the 2 main other things are dysbiosis, so those pathogenic or bad gut bugs. And then the other thing is in some people, gluten. And so, if you have bad gut bugs that are opening up your intestinal permeability, it will trigger the gluten to be flagged on your GI map. Now, that does not mean that forever you need to eliminate gluten because, if we get rid of the bad gut bugs, we heal the lining. Now you can tolerate gluten just fine. You can tolerate broccoli just fine, even though previously you couldn't. So right now, definitely I would remove gluten from your diet because it's not helping you. But in the future, you may be able to reintroduce it just fine if you heal the gut.
And what about any blood tests that you run with your clients, or like do any blood panels, or just simply the GI map?
Yeah, we have a full lab shop, and your listeners can all have access to this, but we have a lab shop of the recommended just like labs that I would get every 6 months and then labs I would get every 12 months or a year, depending on what you're going through. But the general bundle, I would say, is just your basic CBC, CMP, vitamin D, B12 folate, iron panel, insulin, A1C. Your glucose is already going to be in your CBC, CMPs. Yeah, it's all on there. So you're free to all your listeners are welcome to order it themselves. I think they really usually run between $200 to $350 just to run a panel. With the hormone aspects, we also run estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, HBG. thyroid panel, or sorry, T3, T4, reverse T3, TSH, those ones.
Is there common like problems that you see over and over again with people that just keep coming up?
For females, it's
Yeah.
chronic dieting. And
Okay.
for males, it is, I would probably say like low testosterone due to stress. And even with females, I think they kind of get the worst of it because they get the stress and the undereating, and the undereating is an additional stress on the body. And our hormones are so sensitive that it's like if you even a little bit undereat, it's like not good for you.
And yeah, when you talk about undereating, maybe give an example of that.
So, under eating would be both from a carbohydrate perspective, because carbohydrates are actually necessary for your T4 to convert into T3. So, for females specifically, like if they're trying to lose weight and they're on this super low carb diet, it's not necessarily beneficial for their metabolism and for their optimal hormones to be functioning. And really any sort of under eating when we think of, especially most the following that I have, I'm sure you have something similar, is, we're all active, but overdoing or underdoing it is really detrimental and is a stress on the system. So for females, I would say like 2,500 calories, 22, 23 is where you should mostly I see healthy individuals fall between around 2,300 calories for females who are active 5 times a week, 4 to 5, I would probably say, up to for females, 27
Yeah,
probably.
and yeah, I can see this being a problem just in general, getting to
Yeah.
that calorie amount. Like you yourself, you're sort of a smaller stature. Like how tall are you? Like,
I do. So I'm 5'4.5" on a good
okay.
day. When I stand extra tall, I'm 5'5". Um, And I'm also a one percenter. So I do realize that because I do have celiac disease, and that may influence how many calories I'm able to extract from my food, although there is no evidence to support that in the literature. But
And go ahead. I'm sorry.
I am a one percenter, and I'm usually bulking around above that 2,700. So usually in our bodies, we have around 500 calories that we're able to fluctuate around, which means that within 500 calories, you can eat at the top of that limit and not gain weight, or you can eat at the bottom of that limit and not gain weight, because the body just naturally starts adapting, right? Non-exercise activity thermogenesis. You think about, you start fidgeting a little bit more these days. You see you're like, you can't stop walking these days. Though that's what the body adapting to that little extra bit and catching up to it without preventing the weight gain. So if we have that 500 calories, now you see how females, yeah, you can get away with 17, 1,800 calories, but you're on that downside. You're not optimizing up to that 2,300. And imagine if you got to that 2,300, now you can have more power output in the gym. You can build muscle more effectively. And what is muscle? Really metabolically active, which means that you can even burn more calories. And now you can taper up to a 23, 2,500 calories, drop by 2 or 300 calories, and lose weight without even trying.
Yeah. How do you instruct someone to get up to that calorie amount? Because for some people that can be difficult.
And that's where I love to get the gut component involved, because, being in a constant surplus is a digestive burden, right? Like that's a lot of enzymes your body has to be producing. And even now I have a client who's upwards of 4,000 calories a day. And, he's like, I feel really good. I'm not really gaining any weight, but like, my body's starting to feel like I'm struggling a little bit. And you can add in and support the body in those ways. And there's ways to cycle it. But going back to how do you work up to that? Strategies, really, it doesn't have to be that complicated. I think instead of focusing on the vegetables, focus on a little bit more grains. And this is where, fruit juices might be a little bit easier, because when we think about digestion at the end of the day, it is just like a baby. Even how we go to the bathroom is just like a baby. How do you train a baby to eat? How do you train a baby to sleep? Routine, consistency. And when it comes to eating, you don't feed a baby a steak, right? You feed it milk, liquids, liquid proteins. Why do you think bone broth is so popular? It's not because it's magic. It's because it's really easy to digest as a protein source. So you're eating liquid foods, and then you go to pureed foods when you're a little bit older, and then a little bit older, you can tolerate a little bit more, right? And so that's how you can make those smart swaps. So if you're thinking about what foods can I add to add more calories and be really easy to digest, think about the liquids, fruit juices or dried fruits a little bit. You think about oils, olive oils. Even when I make shakes, like I'll pour some MCT oil into it with butyrate in it. And, that's so easy for the gut to digest.
Yeah. Are you familiar with like Dr. Ray Peat and his research on the pro-metabolic?
No.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be something you should, because a lot of what you're talking about sort of mimics what they talk about with fruit juices and things like that is easy ways to add in calories. But anyways, that's a whole nother discussion. I've had some individuals on to talk about that, like Jay Feldman. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but
Yeah.
anyways,
I would say it's more of an athlete perspective, and there's nothing wrong with using more other versions of it, especially just because from a dietitian perspective, I get nervous with the amount of fructose that we're adding in a caloric surplus when the liver is not optimized, and you might see like states of fatty liver. That's just why I get nervous with like the carnivore diet idea is like it's a lot of fructose, which leads to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is one of the top killers of humans and liver disease progression. So when we have high cholesterol combined with this fructose overload, it can form fat around the liver, which can decrease its
al-
function.
although is has there been some pushback on that with fructose, especially from fruits and stuff regarding non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or from what you've seen on your end? Because I've heard some different thoughts on that, but
No, it's not. It's truly how fructose is metabolized. Like there's no pushback possible around the mechanism that we digest fructose because it's different than how we digest glucose. So
right.
it involves the liver to process the fructose regardless, like no
But
matter what it
okay.
is.
I guess I've heard, I guess, because fruit's not all just fructose, right? It's a mix of both. So I think it'd be probably tough to overdo fruit. Don't you think so?
Oh, I agree.
Okay.
I also think though that if you're wanting a caloric surplus and you're drinking a lot of fruit juice and you're eating a lot of fruit, and those are the only sources of glucose, essentially, because you're trying to break it down into it that your body is receiving, then it can get difficult. From an athlete's perspective, it makes sense to incorporate more grains. That's what I'm trying to say at the end of the day. Like when we tapering up to that caloric amount to build the body, you kind of need a little bit more.
And what type of grains do you recommend?
White rice is easiest to digest.
Yeah,
So if
white rice.
you,
Yeah.
yeah, white rice from the US is best. That's tried and true. If you're constipated, make sure that you overcook it. And if you have diarrhea, make sure that you undercook it.
Got it. Got it. What's I like to ask this question to all my guests. What one thing have you changed your mind about over the last 10 years? Could be diet, could be fitness related. What's one thing you've changed
Oh,
your mind?
super easy. Red meat being bad for you. I do believe that we have a lot of data around the carcinogenic effects of meat. So I still would not consume or like grill a lot of my meats continuously over time, especially as a male. But I do think it's healthy to incorporate moderate amounts within the diet.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, because red meat, a lot of the studies are epidemiology studies, right? With based around, and these are more like processed meats as
Mhm.
opposed to like, like a quality meat. And
Yeah. And a lot of times too, those, by the way, when we do those, that data is nowadays, a lot of times we will mark that as processed versus unprocessed meat. So that is two separate categories now. In the past, they didn't mark the data that way, but now we quote unquote know better. So a lot of the studies that are saying the negative health effects like still stay true because they've incorporated confounding variables for smoking, exercise, like education levels, like you have to think about the surveys that they take of the United States and the populations. It's so large and there's so much, which is awesome, right? You should all complete your surveys so
Mm,
that we can fix the research if you think that it's a problem. So we can basically stratify to see, someone like you and me, we can actually pull out those people and do research and analyses on that extracted data sample.
got it. So you've changed your mind on protein.
Yes.
I mean, excuse me, on meats.
Red meat, yeah.
Yeah. And like you said, like I think if you're having quality meat, as long as you're not like burning it, I think, then that would maybe be where that carcinogenic effects could happen from just burning meat. But hopefully, cooking it lightly, no issues there.
Yeah, and there's something to say too. So there's this one study that does a really great job at it, but they basically boiled it down to either three or four different mechanisms that would explain why red meat is not great for us, to try and explain the studies, right? Because we can say the study, but like, how do you explain the biomechanism of which this is happening upon? And I don't remember the complete details, but the first one was like the iron and the heme that's found in it. Specifically for males, for some reason, it seems to be an issue of the iron source at the same time of how it's metabolized with carbohydrates, I think, some sort of component around that. But we'll have to find the study and send it out to
Okay.
everyone. But it basically makes me believe that yes, we can have it in moderation, but it's still something we don't know enough about.
Okay. And I'm a big routine guy. What's a typical routine like for you, eating, working out, and things like that? And yeah, just curious.
I started a new routine actually. I went to a mastermind last month, and because it required me to get up and train before I got to the meetings, I changed my routine.
Mm,
Might be a good thing, but so I wake up, I will have carbs and EAAs while I train. So I'll go train, then I'll come home and eat, get in the office by 8 or 9, and then I usually use the 4-3-2-1 method. So I'll have that breakfast, lunch, dinner, sometimes maybe a snack, but usually I'm a big meal person. Um, and then at night, I use the 4-3-2-1 method, which is what I preach and practice, is 4 hours before bed, you're unplugging from work. 3 hours before bed, you stop eating. 2 hours before bed, you stop drinking. And 1 hour before bed, you unplug from electronics. So that's my wind down routine and wind up routine, I would
mhm.
say.
Oh, I like that 4-3-2-1. That's
Yeah,
good.
it's really easy to remember and it will optimize your sleep, optimize your digestion, give your gut rest, and allow you to have that full fasting period, which is 12 hours that we've seen health benefits from.
So what's the four?
Unplug from work
Un-
mentally. You're not
Got it.
as
Three is stop
food,
eating before bed. Two is what was it?
water,
What's that?
drinking any liquids so that you're
Oh,
not
going to
at
the
night.
bathroom. Yeah, yeah. I need to abide by that one. And one is just like completely unplugged from anything
Yeah.
electronic
I'm
or
human. Like, it's not like 2 hours my alarm goes off and I'm like, can't drink any more water. It's just like naturally that's what I recommend doing. And I'm around that
yeah,
area.
I definitely I would say I implement something very similar to that. Yeah. I definitely I always like cutting off that eating window just to help with digestion. I also think like going for a walk after eating
Yeah.
meals, especially in the evening, can help as well.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Anytime a 5-10 minute walk after eating is really great to just bring things down and let gravity do its own job. A lot of people have acid reflux, and they're the type of people who sometimes, like one tip for acid reflux would be not to lay down after eating because
Sure.
think about yourself perpendicular. It's gravity's doing the job in one space, and on the other space, you're not letting gravity do the work of helping you to pull it through the digestive system.
Yeah. And I would just going back on our talk about under eating, like, I mean, you're eating how many calories?
Usually I'll be eating between around 2,700 calories.
2,700 calories. And you're petite. I mean, you're 5'4". What do
I'm
you
definitely
weigh?
a one percenter. Yeah.
But, I think a lot of women are afraid that,
Yes.
yeah, they're afraid to get up to that. I can tell you, my wife alone, I'm trying to get her to actually eat more. and it's
Yeah.
not so easy. One
And
thing
that's
we,
such an
yeah,
important conversation. I'm so glad that you're doing that to in supporting her with that because I think a lot of our society and we've ingrained in females that they need to eat less. And it's almost like the best thing that a partner can do is provide that safety for a woman that's like, hey, I love you so much. I want to help you feel even better, be even healthier. Like, I'm going to eat with you and we're going to eat a lot together and we're going to get dessert together, and be a
yeah.
part of the process.
Yeah, I've tried. It's not the easiest. I will say, like you mentioned before, one thing that we did is we, with her like coffee, she likes just like a morning coffee. We made it into like a shake. So added in a quality protein, and at least she's getting something there.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Make it a shake. Like we said, right? Bring it down to the liquids as much as possible. The
right.
pureed foods are super easy. Whenever I have someone who's really, really struggling with their gut, I'll even recommend cooking down like green beans and carrots super well, and then pouring some bone broth in it homemade, or you can buy some, and then just puree it. And now it's like so easy to digest. And even the meat you can puree in the bone broth and eat that separately, At
Mm,
that point, you don't have to do your body doesn't have to do as much work.
to
So when you think
digest it,
about
right?
people, yeah, when you think about people, they tell me all the time, they're like, Dasha, I eat an RX bar and like all these things. And I'm like, have you ever like, that's what an RX bar sounds like if you bang it on a countertop, right? Like, how is your gut going to digest that when it's just this organ system that's trying to mush it together? So the easier to digest foods will always be, soups, stews, very well cooked, fibers broken down, and that's how you can really optimize your gut health.
Yeah. And I think tracking calories is important, especially early on, just to know where you're at.
Yeah, 100%.
Excellent. Well, I always ask this to most of my guests. If you were going to give one tip to an individual that was looking to get their body back to what it once was, like 10 years ago, what one tip would you give them?
Follow the speed pillars. So I don't think I even talked to you guys about what those speed pillars were that we preach with our clients, but it's called speed. So the first is sleep, the second is personal stress, the third is environmental stress, the fourth is exercise, and the fifth is diet. All of these things are causing stress in your life. Personal stress, we all have kids, work, etc., but everyone perceives stress completely differently. So you have full control of rewiring your brain to perceive stress differently to help with your digestion so that you're not in a state of SOS in the sympathetic state, right? And that we can get you into the parasympathetic state to start eating your food again, right? So sleep, personal stress, environmental stress, exercise, and diet. If you can choose one, and just do one thing this week. Set one goal. My sleep sucks, so I'm gonna implement the 4-3-2-1 method this week. You're already doing something to better your health.
Love that. The speed technique.
Yeah. Speed up your metabolism by slowing down.
Yeah. Yeah. Stress, whether it's psychological or environmental, like it can take a toll on your gut health and just your energy levels. And like you said, they're all sort of intertwined together.
And why do you feel so good on vacation when you're eating? You're like, I have so many people. I went to Mexico and I felt amazing the whole time, like no food issues. I'm like, yeah, you're not stressed out.
Right. You're not stressed out. You're probably walking on the beach, getting some sun,
Yeah,
grounding.
yeah, exactly.
Well, Dasha, this was a great conversation. Best place for people to find you?
Instagram at Dasha Fitness. I have actually a webinar that goes through all those like 50 plus ways to improve your gut and hormones that I talk about the speed pillars and 10 ways for each. So if you go to my page, it should be up there.
Okay. Yeah. Dasha Fitness on Instagram. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me and thanks for asking all the best questions.
I try. It's like my 400 something episode. So you think I'd be halfway decent. So have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, you too.
Thanks for listening to the Get Lean, Eat Clean podcast. I understand there are millions of other podcasts out there, and you've chosen to listen to mine, and I appreciate that. Check out the show notes at briangryn.com for everything that was mentioned in this episode. Feel free to subscribe to the podcast and share it with a friend or family member that's looking to get their body back to what it once was. Thanks again, and have a great day.